Okay, welcome to our lecture on economic systems. So we're going to look at a couple of different systems here and talk about some of the characteristics and then the positives and the negatives of these different systems. So the first thing that we need to talk about is kind of what are the economic systems and why we have these. So we have these economic systems because the system that we use to run our economy depends on how we answer those basic economic questions. What and how much to produce, how to produce it, and for whom to produce. All right. Every society has to respond to scarcity. And how they respond to scarcity is going to depend on how they answer those basic questions. How they answer those basic questions, if you remember what we talked about before, goes back to what their economic goals are. But also their economic goals kind of depend on that economic system that they've established. And the type of system, we can figure out the type of system by looking at how these questions are answered. So it's all really connected. Those economic questions and economic goals really kind of can help determine what systems we have and help answer kind of these different questions. All right. So let's take a look at these different types of systems. The first one that I want to talk about is what we call a traditional economy. Okay. So the what of the definition. Okay. A traditional economy answers those basic economic questions based on habit, tradition, or what's been done in the past. Okay, so a lot of these economies we kind of think of as a lot of hunter-gatherer societies. Kind of what your ancestors have done is what you do, or what your grandparents have done, and your parents have done. That's what you do. Today in contemporary United States, we see this among the Amish community, right? They kind of do the same things that their ancestors have done before them. Now, this does provide for stability. You know what to expect. You know kind of how much to make, and you know that your economy is going to be relatively stable because you've figured it out. On the other hand, the negative side of this is that we see a lack of growth, right? This economy isn't focused on profit. It's largely kind of a trading or a bartering system. Traditionally, we see people produce enough for what we call sustenance, right? They produce enough to kind of provide for their family, and there's not a whole lot of extra. And so there's not much to kind of bring to a market beyond what you need to survive. Okay, and so this is kind of historically we see traditional economies, but we often see them change as the communities grow and as technology is also introduced. All right, so the next economic system that I want to talk about is what we call a command economy. A command economy is where you have one central authority that answers all those basic economic questions. So traditional economy, those questions are answered by kind of habit and tradition. In a command economy, you have a central authority deciding what and how much to produce, how it's going to be made, and who gets access to it. Okay. The decisions are usually based on the needs of the state or the country, kind of the community at large, okay? And that's how they make these decisions. Historically, we see command economies when countries have been focused on industrial or military growth, because again, it's about what's best for the community and it's about growing the economy of that state or that country. Oftentimes we kind of refer to this in economics as guns are better than butter, right? That it's more important to have industry, to have businesses, to produce goods than it is to focus on agriculture, okay? Because there's the economic growth that comes with that as well. Contemporary historical, you may think of maybe the Soviet Union. Contemporary North Korea is a good example of a command economy, okay? Now, some of the positives of a command economy is that you're really able to switch production very quickly. If you have just one central authority that's making all of these decisions, that central authority can say, hey, we're making all these cars, but now we need tanks. So all those car factories, you're making tanks now. And it's not up to anybody else. You just have to do what you're told. And so production can shift very quickly in this sense, which can be a positive for the market. On the other hand, one of the negative sides of this is that the individual needs are rarely met in a command economy. There's little flexibility to kind of deal with the day-to-day changes or the day-to-day needs of the individual people within a command economy. Remember, the command economy is focused on the needs of the state or the country. It's not so much interested in the needs of individual people. Another negative component to a command economy is that it does require a very large government. In order to oversee the production of all the things, in order to figure out what's needed, you're going to need a very large government to be able to do this. Another negative side to a command economy is that innovation or new ideas really are discouraged, okay? There's not really room for new ideas with the government making all the decisions, right? Not only that, but there's really not much of an incentive because it's not about kind of growing the economy. You're just being told what to do. And if you have a great idea for something, you can't just go out and start a business based on that idea anyway, because you've got to go to the central authority to even get permission. So there's not much incentive for new ideas. All right, so the next type of economic system that I want to cover is what we call a market economy. A market economy is where the market or the supply and demand answers those basic economic questions. So what and how much to produce, right? The supply is going to be decided by what is the demand, right? If people want something, then there will be supply for it. And so supply and demand or the market answers those basic economic questions. And they do this through the interactions of buyers and sellers, right? Buyers want something, sellers produce that thing. And so that's what makes the decisions about what and how much, how to produce it, and for whom. If you've got the money to buy the product, you can buy it in a market economy, okay? There's quite a few characteristics of a market economy, so we're just going to go through a number of characteristics here. They're listed down on the bottom of the slide, and there's going to be a few of them. So first of all is economic freedom. Individuals are really able to decide how to use all the factors of production in a true market economy. They can decide how to use the land, how to use the capital, how to use the labor, and then any new idea they want, anybody comes up with, they could potentially build a business around that if they wish. There's also voluntary exchange in a market economy. Buyers and sellers enter into agreements on a voluntary basis, right? There's no central authority telling sellers what to sell or what to make or what to produce. It's based on the market. It's based on what the people or the consumers or the producers, really in this case, want to produce, okay? It's voluntary. And the consumers get to choose what they want to consume, okay? On a voluntary basis. No one is forcing them to consume anything they don't want to. Also, we see private property as a characteristic of a market economy, all right? A lot of this should sound very familiar, by the way, to what you might think of as the economy here in the United States. So individual people are able to own those factors of production, land and capital. Okay, it's not owned by the government, but individual people are actually own those factors of production. We also see a characteristic of market economies called the profit incentive, right? You get to make money. If you sell something that people want, then you get a profit. You get to make money, and that's the incentive for producing things. And this ultimately provides growth in a market economy, right? Another characteristic is competition, and competition really forces efficiency. This forces those producers to use those factors of production as efficient as they possibly can. All right. Competition also leads to lower prices for consumers and higher quality. If I bring something to the market and I'm the only one who offers it, then I can do whatever I want with my factors of production. I don't have to be very efficient with them. I can set whatever price I want. But as soon as one other person or one other company comes and begins to offer that same product, right, I now have incentive to produce more, and ideally to either have a higher quality product than my competitor or have a lower price, which is good for consumers. And so competition really forces those lower prices and higher quality as well as efficient use of factors of production. Okay, so some of the positives of a market economy. First, the market can adjust over time. right? So as demand changes, then supply can respond. So think about cars. In the 1920s, when cars came on the market, yeah, there was some demand for it, but you had to make quite a bit of money and have, a place to store the car and all the things. Well, by then, so there was some demand, but not a ton. And so there was some supply. But all of a sudden in the 1950s, after World War II, a lot more people have a lot more money, disposable income. There are now freeways being built all across the nation. So there's a much more incentive to have a car. So now we see the demand steeply increase, which also then increases the supply because more people want a car. Same thing with computers. 30 years ago, it wasn't common for every single household to have a computer or even necessary. Today, it's pretty necessary for every household to have a computer. And so the demand has increased over the last 30 years, therefore so did the supply, right? So the market responds to, and the market is able, I should say, to adjust over time. Also, we see that economic freedom really does allow for more participation, okay? People are able to participate in the market how they want, and so therefore they participate because they get to make that choice. All right. And we also see very little interference of government in a market economy. In a true market economy, there's almost no government interference in the market. And so these are some of the positives of the market economy. In addition to this, we also have more variety of goods and services. When the central authority is saying, hey, here's the hot sauce that we produce for the state, you only have that one choice. In a market economy, anybody who wants to make hot sauce can make hot sauce and sell it in the market. This then provides for higher consumer satisfaction, right? The consumers have more choices. They get to choose which specific product they want, and that leads to a more positive experience for the consumer. On the other hand, some of the negative sides of a market economy is that the market only serves those who can produce. If you can't work, you don't get the benefits of a market economy. The market economy only works for those who work. Okay, it only serves those who are able to produce. So if there's any reason, young, old, disabled, hurt on the job, whatever the reason, you can't work in a market economy, remember there's little government interference, then you're not going to be able to participate in the market economy and it's not going to serve you. So this really can be a negative side of the market economy. In addition, the market economy is almost I think of it as fragile. In order for the market economy to work, three things have to happen. If even one of them is missing, then you're going to have an imperfect market. So the first is competition, which we talked about. You must have competition to have a true market economy, right? If you don't have competition, then it's a monopoly, which isn't a market economy. All right, so you have to have competition. You also have to have freedom of movement of resources. So in order to produce what I want to produce, I have to be able to move my factors of production and my resources where I need to move them. If that's inhibited at all, then it's no longer a true or free market. And then finally, the third thing is access to information, and this is required for voluntary exchange. In order to truly enter into a voluntary exchange, I have to know what I'm getting into. If I don't have all the information, then I'm not necessarily entering into a voluntary exchange situation. And so that access to information is absolutely necessary for voluntary exchange to happen. And so this is a negative only because if one of these things is missing, it makes it an imperfect market. And so that's where I mean by this market economy is very fragile in a sense. It's not super strong and robust. All right, and the final economic system that we're going to talk about is what we call a mixed economy. Almost every society actually has a mixed economic system. It may favor one over the other, but it has characteristics of one or more of these. Okay, so what we see here in the United States, right, we have a market economy, but we also have government intervention. And so kind of aspects of that command economy. We combine government intervention with the market economy in the American mixed economic system. Now, there's a degree of this government intervention in the economy, as I mentioned here. So, and the reason for this is because the needs and the wants of modern society are really difficult to meet by the government or by the market, right? Not one of those economic systems is able, or for that matter, the traditional economic system, not one of those economic systems is able to meet the needs and wants of modern society, right? Therefore, we really need to kind of merge them together into this mixed economy. Plus, some needs are more appropriate for the government to provide. For example, in order to ensure access to the market for all people, that's more appropriate for the government with their policies to be able to provide that. And also think about in the United States, we have things like the protection of private property or the enforcement of contracts, the Fifth Amendment protection of private property, and the Due Process Clause, the enforcement of contracts. Now, that is more appropriate for the government and to create and enact and enforce policies than for the market to just keep on doing what it's supposed to do. Now, the amount of intervention, the amount of government intervention, and the type depends on those economic goals, right? We as consumers have to think about how much freedom are we willing to give up to meet those economic goals. I might have to give up a lot more of my kind of market economy freedoms in order to have a stable and predictable economy, or in order to have economic equity, depending upon what our goals are. But ultimately, with the mixed economy, what we see happening is the government becomes part of what we call the circular flow of economics. The government buys factors of production, land or capital, or pays people, right? The labor. The government also buys goods and services. Maybe Boeing, for example, produces airplanes and the government purchases those airplanes. In addition, the government can sell goods and services into the market. Consumers can buy goods or goods produced by the government, or services provided by the government. And in this way, the government becomes part of that market economic system. So this is the end of our lecture. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, be sure to email me or come to office hours, and I look forward to talking to you about this in class soon. Thank you so much.